You don't start a YouTube channel over 40 for the same reasons you would at 20. You're not here for attention, experimentation, or because you have endless time to waste. Your reasons for doing this change depending on where you are in life, and at this stage, the goals are different. If you started YouTube over 40, you may have noticed you run into the same 3 problems constantly: focus, uncertainty, and advice. I'm Lauren. By the end of this video, you'll understand why these problems keep surfacing for people starting later, and what has to be built in differently for this work to actually hold. Most people who start later in life already understand work. They understand responsibility and consequences. Now, that changes how decisions feel, including the decision to put yourself forward on camera. I've realized a lot of advice aimed at new creators assumes a life stage that no longer applies. It assumes flexible time, low pressure, and room to make mistakes without real impact. That's not the reality for most people watching this. This video isn't about growing fast or taking shortcuts. It's not about pushing through at all cost. It's about encouragement and how I'm building this channel in a way that fits an adult life with adult constraints and real life risks. If you're over 40 and considering YouTube as something more than a hobby, then this conversation is for you. When people over 40 use YouTube, the challenges they face have nothing to do with their ability or their confidence. Instead, 3 practical issues show up very quickly, and they aren't talked about enough. The first problem is time, not the amount of time you have in theory, but the kind of time you actually get to use. Adult time is fragmented. It comes in short windows between responsibilities. Meetings, family, health, and work commitments breaks your day, which makes long, uninterrupted creative sessions the exception and not the rule. Most YouTube advice assumes you can stretch a task across an afternoon. That assumption fails fast when your available time comes in 40-minute blocks. The second problem is risk. At this stage of life, the cost of effort matters. Time spent on something that goes nowhere has consequences. Income pressures are very real. There's less desire for trial and error, not because curiosity is gone, but because there's less room to waste, and you don't feel free to experiment endlessly because every hour has a consequence. The third problem is information overload. There's no shortage of information about how to start a channel. The issue is relevance. Most advice is created by people with different energy levels, different responsibilities, and a different tolerance for risk. Watching more videos can create the illusion of progress while delaying action. And when you consume information faster than you can apply it, the gap between knowing and doing grows. Let me explain how these 3 problems interact. Limited time increases pressure. Higher risks makes decision-making harder. And advice overloads makes it really hard to choose the next step. None of these problems are solved by motivation alone. They're solved by a different approach. I want to walk you through my logic for this YouTube strategy. I'll try to be more intentional about how I frame it for clarity. This isn't a story about how hard things are. It's about decision-making under pressure. If you've been through something similar, you'll recognize this. In 2024, I was retrenched. I spent months applying for work. I sent out over 2,300 applications. Few responses came back and almost none led anywhere meaningful. That experience matters here because it strips away illusions. When you reach this stage of life, you don't romanticize work. You understand exactly what effort costs you. You understand how long it takes to recover from wasted energy. And you become very clear about what you are and are not willing to spend your time on. I'm private by nature, and I haven't been comfortable drawing attention to myself, and yet the reality is simple. Income now requires visibility. Avoiding that fact doesn't make it disappear. So the question isn't whether YouTube could work. The question is whether you could engage with it honestly without turning yourself into something you're not. I'm building this channel alongside everything else in my life. The days are long sometimes, sure, and that's okay. Many of us over 40s were taught responsibility early. When we commit to a project, we tend to commit fully. Some are prone to over-processing, over-preparing, and wanting things to be correct before they're visible. That's fine. But that tendency doesn't disappear when you start a channel. It follows you into the work. The real change happens in how you manage things once you're actually paying attention to how you want to do them. Now, validation isn't the point here. You need to prioritize systems that protect your energy for one simple reason. They allow you to keep moving forward without burning out. Using these systems ensure you stay supported throughout your own process. Because at this stage, effort without return isn't noble. It's unsustainable. Most people who start YouTube later in life don't fail because they lack discipline. They fail because they apply the wrong principles. One common mistake is misunderstanding what consistency actually means. Consistency is often presented as frequency in terms of post more, record more, or upload more. But frequency without regard for capacity leads to exhaustion. For adults with full lives, consistency is not about volume, it's about reliability. The real question is, can you return to the work without struggling, or repeat the process without needing ideal conditions? Another mistake is placing too much importance on equipment at the beginning. Researching equipment and software feels productive because they're concrete. You can compare them, you can optimize them, but spending weeks deciding on gear delays the one thing that actually matters: finishing the work and putting it out. Good enough equipment used consistently will outperform excellent equipment used occasionally. The third mistake is copying a pace of younger creators. Many successful channels were built during periods of life with fewer constraints. Trying to match that pace later on creates unnecessary strain. It leads to longer hours, skipped rest, and eventually resentment towards the work itself. There's another mistake that doesn't get talked about often enough: perfectionism disguised as responsibility. It sounds reasonable to want things to be correct before they are visible, to be prepared and to avoid mistakes, of course. But readiness is difficult to measure, and it's easy to keep redefining it. Finished work is measurable. Plans are not. It's not about being flawless, though. It's about learning to make progress without being your own worst enemy. And that requires a different set of rules than the ones usually offered. Rather than trying to force yourself into advice that doesn't fit, start building an approach that works with the reality you're in. Not an ideal week or a perfect routine, but the days that you actually have. The first decision is to keep the production stack simple and bound. This is what it looks like for me in practice. I use OBS to record. There's no extra layers between me and my work. I don't need to assemble setup each time or remember a long list of steps. This is something I've noticed though over time. When recording feels complicated, it creates an obstacle. And when it's simpler, the work gets done faster. I use CapCut for editing for the same reason. I'm not trying to be an editor. I'm trying to finish videos. CapCut does what I need without sending me down a rabbit hole. It lets me make clean cuts, clean the audio, and simple visuals, and I can move on. For thumbnails and on-screen visuals, I use Canva for speed and a clean look. It's the fastest way to get something finished without slowing my process down. If you want to do this too, those tools can remove a lot of guesswork. More than anything, it's about having a clear structure. For many new creators over 40, setting up a channel is harder than it first appears. YouTube isn't just a platform. It's also software with settings, decisions, and defaults that aren't always obvious. That's why I documented the setup step by step. I've left the link in the description below to the step-by-step YouTube setup and settings guide. not as a product to upsell complexity, but as a way to remove it. Once something is documented, you don't have to rethink it every time. The second part of this approach is asset-first thinking. Each video is treated as a piece of work that should remain useful over time. I'm taking a longer view rather than responding to platform changes week by week. I'm building a body of work that answers questions people over 40 actually have, in the language they recognize. This changes how topics are chosen. It changes how much time is spent perfecting work, and it changes what success looks like in the short term. One finished video has value. 10 related videos have leverage. The third piece is work rhythm. You don't need to be recording every day or editing endlessly. The work happens in a defined window with clear limits. When the session ends, it ends. That boundary protects your energy and prevents resentment from creeping in. The goal is not to push harder. The goal is to keep going without burning out. Once the work is simplified and the tools are contained, the next challenge is decision making. This is where many adults lose momentum and quit. Not because the work is difficult, but because every choice feels more demanding than it needs to be. When time is limited, even small decisions accumulate and create strain. To manage that, I use a small set of filters. They're not rules or checkpoints, they're just something I use to keep my workflow going. Use them if you think that they would lighten your workload. Before you commit to something, ask yourself these questions. Will it reduce or increase the amount of work required later? If a choice makes the next recording easier, the next edit faster, or the next upload simpler, it's usually worth doing. If it adds steps, options, or maintenance, it needs to justify itself. The second filter is uncertainty. Some actions remove doubt, others create more of it. If something clarifies the process, makes expectations clearer, or removes a question you keep revisiting, it has value. If it adds new choices, it often slows things down. The third filter is time relevance. The question is, will this matter in 6 months? Not emotionally, but practically. Will it still support the work you're doing, or is it only useful right now? This prevents spending time on things that feels urgent but don't contribute to the long-term build. These filters don't eliminate effort, but they do reduce wasted effort. They also remove the need for constantly reassessing decisions. Once a choice passes the filters, it stands. That alone frees up a surprising amount of attention. For adults who tend to overthink, this kind of structure is not restrictive. It's a relief. Building something alongside a full adult life requires patience, not passive patience, but in the day-to-day sense of the word. Progress at this stage isn't always visible immediately. It's cumulative. If it's difficult, it doesn't automatically mean you're doing something wrong. Often it simply means the conditions are real. When results don't appear straight away, it's tempting to assume the plan failed. In many cases, the plan hasn't had enough time to take effect. This channel is being built one piece at a time, with usefulness as a priority. If this way of approaching YouTube makes sense to you, you're welcome to subscribe and follow along as the work continues. In the next video, I'll be talking about equipment, not in terms of what looks good online, but what actually matters when you're starting YouTube over 40 and need a setup that works without anxiety. The link is on the screen.